Rick,
Madam Chair, we are recording.
thank you. Hello and welcome. I call to order this April 7th, 2021 meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. First, allow me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Josh Levy,
Here.
Barry Kaufman,
Here.
John Conley,
Here.
Tom Jacob,
Here.
Rick Lunetta,
Here.
Louise Miller,
Here.
Dick Riley,
Here.
Jim Healy, and our
Here.
staff member, Louise Misgard.
Here.
Good evening. This open meeting of the Needham Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate transmission of the virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law, except for the agenda item entitled Citizen Request to Address the Finance Committee. This meeting will not feature public comment. The Needham Finance Committee is convened by Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. As a first order of business, I would ask for a motion that this meeting will be continued to the committee's next meeting of April 14th, 2021, if a technical problem presents itself. Is there such a motion?
So moved. Second.
Okay, let's just take a roll call vote on that. John Conley,
Yes.
Louise Miller,
Yes.
Tom Jacob,
Yes.
Dick Riley,
Yes.
Jim Healy,
Yes.
Josh Levy,
Yes.
Barry Kaufman,
Yes.
Rick Lunetta.
Yes.
Myself, yes. As a first agenda item, we will be moving into executive session under exception three, excuse me, which allows this for collective bargaining strategy. An executive session is necessary to protect the bargaining position of the town with respect to this collective bargaining. Do I have a motion to move into executive session?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
a roll call vote to do that. John Conley,
Yes.
Louise Miller,
Yes.
Tom Jacob,
Yes.
Dick Riley,
Yes.
Jim Healy,
Yes.
Josh Levy,
Yes.
Barry Kaufman,
Yes.
Rick Lunetta,
Yes.
and Carol Fischetti. We will now enter into executive session, and then after the executive session is concluded, we'll reconvene this public meeting. Thank you.
feel like this is like speed dating going from room to room.
Except you have the same date each time.
Hello? I did not realize there was a public service announcement.
I arranged to have that there. People showed up at the meeting wondering where you were.
Thank you, Dave. You think of everything.
I kept running into that when I was trying to join the other meeting.
So we are reconvening this meeting. I don't need to call it to order. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. So we are returning. Everybody's here?
I don't think Louise
Louise.
knows it.
Oh, we lost Louise.
8 out of 9. Did that again.
I think Louise is on the attendees list.
She's a participant?
Yeah. I'll move her in.
Thank you. Louise, are you here?
Yes, I could see and hear you guys. I just wasn't there with you.
Oh, okay. We can't see you, but that's fine.
I'm not sure why not.
We'd love to see you, but just in case.
Great.
So we are reconvening the open session of the Needham Finance Committee. And our first agenda item, is any citizen request to address the Finance Committee.
Madam Chair, Matthew Tuttleman has his hand raised. I'll bring him into the meeting.
Great, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Mr. Tuttleman. Welcome to the Needham Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
I understand you want to address the Finance Committee. We're in executive session. We have quite an agenda ahead of us, so we're going to give you a few minutes, preferably 3, no more than 5, to make a presentation.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so very much. So I had been kind of directed to the Finance Committee after making some inquiries to certain members of the Select Board. And so I've just got some questions that I'd like to ask of the committee, and hopefully we can figure out if there's some guidance that you can provide me or action that can be taken. So just a very brief 30 seconds on me. Matthew Tuttleman, been a Needham resident for over 23 years now. I work in the energy sector and have for the last 17 years. And in my professional life, I work with municipal, commercial, and industrial businesses to help them reduce OpEx for their organizations, specifically focused on energy. Okay. And so the question that I posed to the Select Board was around why or how we could get a better adoption rate on town municipal buildings to adopt solar. I did some research on the Finance Committee's website and was able to see that back in, ultimately in 2016, but we were looking back in 13 at adding solar to the landfill. There was some great value there. Apparently, based on the forecasted numbers, that project has already saved the town over $3.1 million at no cost to the community. And so my interest is to express my interest to the Finance Committee to say, there are communities all around us, and we just became a Needham Green Communities, right? Part of the Green Communities Act, that are deploying solar on their town buildings at no capital expense to the community through what are known as power purchase agreements. very similar to what was done on the landfill. And, simply put, this energy from the landfill provides us about 1/3 of the town's energy. So, the budget back in 13, in which this proposal was there, was 1.77 million for energy. So the solar's paid for itself twice already for the entire electrical budget for the town. And I'd love just to see what I can do to encourage you all to put solar as an active measure to help us reduce our energy as an operating expense for the community. So that's my question.
Louise?
So I know we don't normally answer citizen questions, but I was the finance committee member who worked on the solar article for the landfill, and we did understand the value there. Procedurally, the finance committee does not propose town meeting warrant articles, nor does the finance committee request budgets. Those are done by, so finance committee opines on warrant articles, and then finance committee puts together a budget, but it is based upon departmental requests.
Okay,
So
but
procedurally, it's not, we're not the originator of
Okay.
these.
In
so
other words, the select board pawned you off on us.
Jim or James, I could not have summarized that better. It has been an
That's my talent.
It has been an interesting game of hot potato. Unfortunately, I think I'm at a point as a concerned citizen where I'm shifting from potato to squeaky wheel. And so thank you for your response, Louise. How might one get something added to a warrant article?
So,
Or
if
how
you
might I
would like-
encourage you to opine over this topic?
Yep, no, so I'm just gonna offer, if you would like to continue the conversation offline, I am happy to explain to you procedurally how these things work. And I don't know, are our emails published somewhere, Louise? How does someone get in touch with us?
I have his email. I can put you two together.
Yeah, and then I can explain to you what the procedure is. Okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Is there any other guidance from other members of the finance committee that might help me in my path of enlightenment?
Louise did a great job. I would have said the same thing.
That sounds great. Well, Louise, I thank you for your response, and I look forward to communicating with you. And I hope to be in front of you all again at some point, showing you how much money my efforts will have saved the town. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mr. Tillman, for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Bye.
Good luck, Mr. Tillman.
Thank you.
So now we're turning on the agenda to Article 48, Needham Unite Against Racism Resolution.
Are we passing on the minutes?
Oh, I am so sorry. I forgot that. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at the minutes of March 31st? Any corrections?
As amended, I make a motion to accept.
Second,
Okay, let's take a voice vote on that. Tom, Jacob,
yes.
Barry Kaufman,
Yes.
Rick Lunetta,
Yes.
Dick Riley,
Yes.
John Conley,
Yes.
Jim Healy,
Yes.
Josh Levy,
Yes.
Louise Miller,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Minutes are approved. So coming to the warrant articles, first we're going to discuss Article 48, Needham Unite Against Racism Resolution. And who will be,
Madam Chair, who do I bring in for that warrant
I'm
article?
assuming Marianne Cooley, but I don't know if,
Yes, Ms. Cooley has her hand up. I'll bring her into the
And she
Okay.
might have others.
Mary Ann, is there anyone else to bring in?
No, I think it's just me. Unless Kate is around, I don't know if she had planned to come, but I'm the sole Nuwari person.
Okay.
Am I presenting? Am I answering questions that I'm not sure of? So,
I mean, I think we can throw it out to questions.
that
Unless,
would be fine.
Dick?
Let me ask a question, and I think the next two articles have this issue, which is normally we don't take a position on something that doesn't have a clearly defined financial impact. Having said that, I'm reluctant to have the Finance Committee not take a position on this. So help me on the financial
Well,
impact aspect of it.
I have a question on the financial impact. So obviously this is a resolution, but I know in that your workings with Nuwari, you have hired outside consultants to help you, I thought, kind of work with this board and perhaps draft the mission. And what are the financial implications going forward should this resolution pass? What are you thinking there?
So I don't think that we have answers to that yet. And as you may or may not realize, there had been a warrant article that was a placeholder for some funds for Nuwari. We opted to pull that, and it's likely to come back to you or to town meeting in the fall once we can better define how specifically we would use those funds this year. It's likely that they will be used for a speaker series or a series of facilitated conversations around policing, for example. And there are probably some other things, but when those are better defined, we will come back. There may be some broader questions, but I don't expect those to be kind of understood until maybe a year from now. So at this point, the group is making an interim report to town meeting that stipulates what we have learned so far, just kind of briefly doing a survey of all the key areas that were specified for review. And then over the course of the next year, we'll be taking a little bit deeper dive with a goal of understanding who the institutional stakeholders are by each area of the various goals. So it won't stay within Nuwari. Nuwari isn't a permanent organization.
Louise?
So I have a couple of questions. First one is Nuwari's work. Oh, I understand it to be a working group that the Board of Selectmen appointed.
Correct.
Okay. So my first question is, I don't understand why town meeting has anything to do with setting policy for the town. That's a select board function. And secondly, to the extent that we're talking about funding that may or may not occur, to the extent that the select board has a working committee and have a policy and are supporting certain activities, why would that simply not be part of your operating budget? So that if there are programs that the select board wants to support, put the request into the operating budget and have it go through the normal process for expenditures of funds.
So the select board is typically not in the business of doing that. In this case, we have taken on that responsibility as sort of, the central policy group for the town in terms of recognizing the vote of town meeting from last year that really requested that the town take some action with respect to this issue of racial equity. And so to the extent that understanding and being able to articulate clearly how those funds would be used and what the goal of the use of those funds is at this point in time, that's why it's not in the budget at this point in time. If that's clearly defined in the fall, then we would plan to bring a supplemental request then.
So, oh, go ahead, Jen.
Louise wanted to follow up.
Louise wanted to follow up? No, I was
No, it's
ready.
okay.
But Jim, go ahead.
So I agree with Dick. If this does not have a financial impact, then I don't think we need to, get into the weeds of this. And I'm happy to pass on them. But if in fact we're now talking that it might have a financial impact and it may involve some decision by the finance committee, I certainly have a number of comments with respect to the matters that are in Article 48. But as long as we understand as a committee that there's no financial impact, then I don't think there's a need to do that. I don't agree with all this language, but it's of no consequence if in fact there's no financial impact. I understand what my role is as a FinCom member, as opposed to me as an individual who's been in the town since 1959. I would say that there was a human rights committee in this town. I assume it still exists. Michael Vaughn, back in the day, I think that was his name, one of the great guys who did a wonderful job. I don't know what happened to that committee and or how that committee interacts with this new committee. With respect to money, I couldn't agree with Louise more. If the Board of Selectmen thinks that there are initiatives that need to be taken with respect to any matter within the town, and if it's within the Board of Selectmen budget, it should be in their budget, and there should be a request for it, and it should go through the normal budgeting process, ultimately for approval by town meeting. I would also say that the school department has had a diversity summit for any number of years. And that summit, if I'm not mistaken, has been paid for within the school committee's budget. So I don't think we need to be funding other committees. I've been on a lot of committees in my 30 years of service to the town. Nobody appropriated monies to any of the committees that I served on. We had to go to town meeting, make the request for the appropriation, and then it was either allowed or denied. So I'm not sure that this is the right moment to get into a complete review of all of the items in this Article 48. But if it is, this is going to be a long meeting.
So
Jim,
go ahead, Mary Ann.
I would just say that if there is a request for funds, it will go to town meeting. So you are perfectly correct. There's also not an intent on the part of Nuwari to be substituting for work that is already going on.
So, Louise,
I was just going to say, I mean, to the extent that this is policy, I don't think it is the finance committee's place to opine on policy. That is exactly what we elect the select board to do. And then with respect to budget, I already, made my point that if it's a select board initiative, it should be part of the select board budget. And that even in the fall, we can simply amend the budget, not create new warrant articles for committees that are really working groups.
so I agree with Jim. I don't, and Dick, I don't think there are financial implications to this specific article, and our reason for existence is to opine on matters that have a financial impact to the town. However, I do wonder whether this whole resolution should be discussed together with the budget items that will support it. Like, I don't understand actually why it was bifurcated, and it makes for a much more difficult discussion, because I, for one, know that at some point there will be a financial implication. So I guess at that point we can look at it. I'm just wondering, for town meeting, why aren't you putting it all together at once?
So I'm sure you will all recall that the select board was directed in the fall to make a report to town meeting this spring in May. Therefore, we are bringing this interim report. The first of the objectives and I think there was an intent by some at the time in the fall that every issue that had been raised would be resolved in 6 months. All right. 400 years of history, 6 months to solve a very challenging issue. So what the group has done is really focused on trying to understand some of the dimensions of the problem, or the issue, I wouldn't call it a problem, but of the issue, trying to understand areas that might merit exploration, right? And areas where in fact their concerns were allayed. There's some of those as well, all right? The first goal and objective that had been requested was that they articulate a vision and make a recommendation for racial equity in Needham and for the guiding principles that would inform future actions. So that is the piece that is being brought right now as the select board is asking various town departments and organizations to adopt these and start to think about some of their work through this lens.
Josh?
So is this article a vehicle for the select board to present that report to town meeting?
So they will be presenting this interim report to town meeting and asking for a resolution in support of the overall vision and guiding principles.
And then why is the text of the resolution not in the main motion? I noticed that it's all in the description.
That was the moderator's recommendation and we took his advice.
Dick?
Yeah, I would just like to clarify a little bit. I was given more credit, I think, than I'm due. I asked a question. I said it wasn't obvious to me whether there was financial implications and asked whether there were. I understand Ms. Cooley to say it wasn't obvious to them either what the financial implications were. So I think what's emerging from this discussion is there isn't, but I didn't assume that at the outset. I asked the question whether there were financial implications.
Thank you for the clarification. Are there any other, John?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Go ahead.
And that motion would be that the Finance Committee not take a position on Article 48 because it does not have, as that article is constituted, does not have a financial implication to the town.
Do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Let's take a voice vote. Barry Kaufman,
Yes, I agree.
Rick Lunetta,
Agree.
Tom Jacob,
Yes.
Dick Riley,
Yes.
John Conley,
Yes.
Jim Healy,
Yes.
Josh Levy,
Yes.
Louise Miller,
Yes.
and myself, yes. So that is unanimous.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Marianne, I'll move you back to the attendees. And Madam Chair, I will bring in Joseph Leghorn for Article 49.
Great.
Thank you, Dave.
Bye, Mary.
And I'm trying to bring in Mr. Leghorn. He will be joining us in just a moment.
Great.
All right, let me unmute and start the video.
Hello,
Good
Mr.
evening, all.
Hello, Mr. Leghorn. Thank you for coming to our meeting.
Oh, my pleasure.
You want to take a moment to speak about your petition?
Yeah, sure. And before I do that, I'd like to, it's been a long haul getting here over 2 town meetings, and I would like to thank all the assistance and clear communication that Louise Misgerd has sent me and worked with, because often staff is always overlooked, but they are so important to the functioning of government. So thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
Personally. Um, This article came about because of some constituent unrest among those in Precinct D and Precinct F on Linden Street, where some people just like to leave their trash cans by the side of the road forever. I first brought this to the select board, who hemmed and hawed and then said, no, this is a problem for the health department. Went to the health department and they said, no, we can't do anything until the select board passes a bylaw. And so I am not one who tolerates bureaucratic runaround, right, Jim?
And now you're with the finance committee.
Well, you know, and so I decided, like, hey, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, that had an ordinance in the 50s where you could put out your trash can after 5 p.m. and it had to be back off the street by 5 p.m. the next day, or there was a summons on your door and you paid a fine. And as a kid growing up, that was my chore. So it seemed to me to be not a really difficult thing. So I drafted something and presented it to the select board. And a number of members had a lot of, quote, problems with it. When asked, what are the problems with it? We won't tell you, but you have to fix it. And one of them, comments certainly indicated that he or she had not, now stop it, he had not even read it. So the whole issue is, in some ways, is, and I know that a lot of people view me as a progressive, and in other ways I'm sort of conservative, sort of a breakdown in the social compact where people just don't care about the neighborhood and how things look and how their actions affect others. And when you look at financial implications, if you have people leaving their garbage out, and who knows, sooner or later we'll get, cars up on blocks on front yard, it affects the value of property, which can reduce the tax base. So my view is, in many ways, an ordinance like this, and certainly, as we all know, there's a lot of discretion in enforcement. A knock on the door from somebody in authority pointing out that you've got to do this, or else the next time I come back, you'll get your first offense, will bring people in line. I hate that we're at that point, because as citizens, we should all be responsible to the common good. So that's really where I'm at. Rick?
Rick, go ahead.
The question, if I may, Mr. Leghorn. I guess I have no authority to speak because I schlep myself to the dump every Saturday. What impact does this have to the town overall? How many recalcitrant citizens are there?
Around town, there are a number of them. There are not a lot, but they are recalcitrant. And my constituents have said, I've spoken to the person, he slammed the door in my face, more than once. So, I mean, there are these issues. And I hate to say too, this past winter, I could not believe the number of my neighbors who blow their snow from their driveway into the street. I mean, I just, it's part of it is, how do we establish a social compact again where everyone respects everyone else?
So
And in some ways, sometimes you have to enforce rules.
So, Mr. Leghorn, are you suggesting that somebody from the Department of Health or the police kind of go around, and if they see an offense?
Well, more like the way we enforce the parking restrictions in Needham, where they are not enforced unless a neighbor complains. I've heard that from the select board, no, numerous members of the select board. What this does develop is a certain level of scofflawism, for want of another word. But it's, if that's the way we do it in Needham, then yeah, somebody complains and then somebody goes out. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that. You don't have to patrol, but there's at least a way that you get municipal response to a citizen complaint rather than go to the Board of Health, now go to the select board. It's just, the failure of a response leads to the breakdown of society when people engage in self-help.
Tom, did you have a comment?
Yeah, quick question. I'm not familiar with the bylaws. Is there no regulation in this regard at all in our bylaws?
Nothing.
Josh?
So Mr. Leghorn, I do appreciate that you took the initiative to write this bylaw when you saw that the select board wasn't taking the initiative. I don't agree with it, though. I think that sometimes I don't agree with the idea of fining neighbors just because they're doing something that you don't like. And in this case, I think it's something. You said you've had conversations, and I know there are always going to be neighbors who maybe don't want to comply, but I just don't. I can't come to agree with it. The one other point I saw is that I don't understand why residences were singled out as having a fine if they don't comply, whereas commercial entities or any other entity would not get fined.
Well, most of the commercial entities don't have this issue, and that raises a whole other scope of issues. So that's why I focused on that. The other thing too is, and if you look at a lot of the literature, and I'm sure you could find, some expert testimony, that if you're living next to a property which is unattractive in appearance, it reduces the value of your property by some amount. Therefore, you go before the Board of Assessors. The one issue is, somebody only needs to win one of those cases, and then you win all of those cases. So there can be an adverse effect on the town.
Jim?
I'm going to try and channel my inner Joe McDonnell. And
That's an in joke. That is definitely an in joke. It's got to be 40 years old.
But I have to say, and I've known literally Joe my entire professional life. I have great respect for him.
And I do of you too.
So I kind of, I see this both ways. And Josh, I do get concerned about, too many bylaws that may impact, our citizenry. And I do think, and I do hope that somehow our neighbors can, be more kind towards each other. That being said, when I was on the select board, there was a gentleman who some of you may remember, Russell Broad, precinct G or wherever he was from. And he had this neighbor, and the neighbor basically created a trash heap in his backyard, and it was awful. And there were vermin and animals, and no one would listen to him. Nobody, everyone just kind of said, oh yeah, that's a shame. Well, that's too bad. And unfortunately, when I was on the select board, I didn't have any traction. And so I lost that vote too, as I lost a lot But I thought it was wrong. I thought it was wrong that that neighbor, that person should have such a dramatic adverse impact to the rest of that neighborhood. It was out on the Stockdale, Mayflower, Whiting Way area. I thought it was wrong. I think the sign bylaw, which is on the books, is not enforced. It's a joke. You know, if you read the sign bylaw, it's supposed to be only on your own property. It's only supposed to be for no more than 6 months. And there are signs that are out there for greater than 6 months, and nobody cares. There's political signs right now that are on the boulevard. That's illegal. They should be taken off. But nobody does anything about that. And then I look at the overnight parking. And Joe's 100% correct. I had a friend of mine who said to me, there's a person who is parking overnight every single day, and he parks right in front of his house to the extent where the guy couldn't get out of his driveway. I said, just call the police. They'll take care of it. And you know what the police said? Exactly what Joe said. Is it really a problem? Is it a problem? Do we have to do anything about it? So I sympathize with what Joe's talking about. I do. And my last comment is I look back to when I was in the Finance Committee in 1997, and my old pal Tom Hannigan voted for trash to be picked up by a service. No more dump. He lost the vote 5-4 by 1. And he was my vice chair at the time. And I said, Tom, I'm selecting you to give the presentation at town meeting. And he said, yeah, but I lost. He goes, but because you lost, you understand what it really means. So I know what it's like to have these same problems that Joe's talking about. So as much as everyone thinks this is an administrative nightmare and it's not fair to our neighbors and so forth, I happen to think that there's nothing wrong with it. So I'm sorry for the long-winded explanation, but I kind of have a long history on these types of administrative matters. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jim. Dick?
You're on
You
mute.
unmute.
Muted.
Unmute.
Yep, there I am, sorry. I question the financial impact. I can see that it has an impact on one's neighbor, but I don't see the financial impact for the town. And I frankly would have trouble with the Finance Committee boldly taking a position on trash cans and ducking the issue on racial equality and equity. So I think this is, does not have sufficient financial impact for the Finance Committee to weigh in on.
Unless everybody is a fourth and subsequent offender.
Yes.
Yeah,
I agree with Dick. Rick?
yeah, I agree with Dick. And the issue is very de minimis in terms of finance. And I too want to concur with Dick. If we take a position here and dent on the last article, I think that'd be very obvious. As painful as it is to a neighbor who lives next door to someone who keeps their trash outside. I don't think it belongs here.
John?
I agree with Dick in every way except for the use of the word ducking.
I'm glad to strike that from my comments.
No need to, just, that's not what we did.
So is there any further discussion? We ready to?
Madam Chair, I move that the Finance Committee take no position on Article 40, as a committee, take no position on Article 49 on the ground that it is no discernible financial impact on the town.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Barry Kaufman? You're muted. Muted.
Sorry, I agree.
Tom Jacob?
Yes.
Rick Lanetta?
Yes.
John Conley?
Yes.
Jim Healy?
No.
You're a no. Okay. Josh Levy?
Yes.
Dick Riley?
Yes.
Louise Miller?
Yes.
And the chair also votes yes. So we will not take a position on that.
To the committee, thank you very much for your time. Please get your vaccines and stay well.
Thank you, and you as well. Thank you for
Here.
doing this.
Mr. Leghorn will return you to the attendees.
Thank you.
So moving to Article 6, amend fiscal year 21 operating budget. Dave,
Yes, Madam Chair, Article 6 is to transfer appropriations from one line within an operating budget to another line in the operating budget. We're doing this in order to try to live within the budgets that were appropriated for fiscal 2021. And there are three budgets that we're looking to amend. In the case of Town Council, we're looking to move the salary money of $75,140 from the salary line to the expense line based on two facts. One, that we don't have a salaried town council, and two, that our expenses for the year will exceed the current $254,000. The second budget that we're looking to make an amendment is the salary line in Public Works in the amount of transferring $225,000 from salaries to Public Works expenses. The purpose of this is related to higher expenses that Public Works has been incurring this year related to COVID-19 expenses that have arisen during the fiscal year. The reason that we're able to reduce the salary in the Public Works budget is for the same reason. Due to COVID-19, some activities that would be overtime, for instance, weren't being done. So that is savings. And also we had been doing a hiring frost in order to ensure that we are able to live within the bottom line appropriated budget. And then the last item is the Park and Recreation budget. We're looking to reduce salary and wages by $50,000. Those salary and wages were payments that weren't made at the beginning of the fiscal year associated with the Rosemary Pool because of the abbreviated season. And they're requesting to move that into expenses to do the very same thing that the Finance Committee has already weighed in on with your recommended budget for FY22, and that's the cost of closing and opening the pool with contractors is more expensive. And in order to meet the cost with opening the pool this year, we're transferring the $50,000 from salaries to expense.
Louise,
What are the COVID-related expenses that DPW has incurred for $250,000?
It's they've incurred more than that. That's the amount that we've seen that we can $225,000 that we can transfer from salaries. Expenses mainly has been the contractors that we have had hired during the school day that's been doing the while school is in session, the wiping down of rails, the cleaning of doorways, the cleaning of bathrooms regularly during the day, because most buildings only have a single custodian and is unable to keep up with the work. The other thing is some of the supplies, the greater use of supplies and air filters.
I'm sorry, now that I understand what those expenses are, why are those not CARES reimbursed expenses?
Because the federal government changed the rules and those expenses are being handled by FEMA. And FEMA has not given us any reimbursements yet. And under the CARES program, it requires you to apply for FEMA and be denied FEMA before you can be reimbursed by CARES.
For custodial expenses?
For costs associated with COVID-19 response, regular costs that that are budgeted in a normal course of business would not be reimbursable either by CARES or by FEMA.
Okay, so we're having a different experience in Wayland. Those are actually going against our CARES allocation.
So,
I know we're gonna have to discuss this further. I understand you need to cover the costs, so I understand that you need the money transferred. But we should talk about what's being, to make sure that we're maximizing cares and comparing notes.
correct, and we certainly are doing that. The CARES, again, with the guidelines, because President Biden changed the FEMA program and made costs that were not eligible, therefore reimbursable by CARES, said now that they're coverable. So you have to do an accounting to the state for the CARES to find different expenses to apply to those monies that you've already received. And that's the accounting process. And that's what we're doing. We intend to get as much reimbursement from the different sources. And if it gets in this fiscal year, then the expenses will be transferred. If it comes in after the close of the fiscal year, the cost would reimburse the town and go out and would be credited to free cash.
Okay.
Dick?
Yes, a question on town council. Are we likely to run in, is this going to be enough to cover in effect, the transfer from an employee to outside, or are we going to likely be hit with a reserve fund transfer at the end of the year?
There is a possibility for the need of a reserve fund transfer. And as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, as we do for you every year, I'll advise you what the trending is looking like for the possible need for a reserve fund transfer.
Jim?
There was a recent report that came out that I was part of a conference at the medical school that said that the notion of cleaning and the notion of wiping things down and disinfecting right now they're questioning whether it has any positive impact or effect at all. Have you seen any of those reports that came out within the last, I'd say, 2 to 5 days? And if that is the case, will this potentially impact whatever future costs might be for those efforts?
In answer to the question, correct. We did see the CDC advisory, and currently, until the state amends its regulations associated with particularly with the public schools, we're still subject to those wipe down requirements. When those are loosened, and I anticipate that they will be, the science takes a little while to catch up with the reality. Or should I say the reality takes a little while to catch up to the science. I anticipate these expenses will decline and we'll be able to do a more our day-to-day cleaning that we do already, which basically the CDC is suggesting, other than an actual outbreak, your standard good cleaning is sufficient.
Anyone else have questions, comments on these amendments to the 2021 operating budget? Dick?
Madam Chair, I recommend that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of Article 6, amending the operating budget as laid out in the text of Article 6.
Do you have a second? Thank you. Let's take a voice vote. Tom Jacob?
Yes.
Gary Kaufman?
Yes.
Rick Lunetta?
Yes.
Dick Riley?
Yes.
John Conley?
Yes.
Jim Healy?
Yes.
Josh Levy?
Yes.
Louise Miller?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So Article 6 is passed. Article 19.
Madam Chair, Article 19 is request to pay unpaid bills of a prior year under. I often say to my friends, I wish we had the ability to say to people we owe money, oh, it's been over a year, so we have to take a vote if we want to pay you or not. But to the subject matter itself, we can't pay a bill of a prior year from a current year appropriation. It requires a town meeting action. In the case of these bills, they were overlooked before the close of the fiscal year. I think it was one of the many oversights that happened because of COVID-19. The encumbrance that would have paid these bills was liquidated, and therefore we have to go to town meeting to pay these bills. And I would ask the committee's support of this. I should add to the committee that this is one of the few votes left at town meeting that requires a supermajority. It's at a special town meeting. It requires a 9/10 vote to pass.
Yowza.
Why is that?
State law.
State
Is
law.
it? Okay.
Yes, yep.
So if town meeting doesn't approve this, the bills don't get paid?
The bills would not be paid, and I suspect it'll be back to you for more money for the legal account.
I think the finance committee becomes responsible, I think.
Just the
Yeah.
newest member.
The newest member pays it, I understand, the first
Awesome.
2,000.
Yeah.
So is there any discussion on this article or?
Just throw it
I
out.
move to adopt.
Second.
Okay, let's take a voice vote on that. Tom, Jacob,
Yes.
Barry Kaufman,
Yes.
Rick Winetta,
Yes.
Dick Riley,
Yes.
John Conley,
Yes.
Jim Healy,
Yes.
Josh Levy,
Yes.
Louise Miller,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. That is passed. So Article 37 was taken off this agenda. And Louise, that will be on next week's?
Yes,
Yep.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Article 35,
Madam Chair, I'll bring in Ann Galati, and then she'll tell me who else to bring in.
great.
Hello, everyone.
Diane.
And you're on vacation.
I am. I'm in the Bahamas. Isn't that wonderful?
Ann, is there anyone else to bring in?
Yes, please. Dan, if possible, as well as Hank and Steve Popper. I should be in attendance to address your capital questions around some of the projects.
And I'm not seeing Steve or
No worries.
Jim.
Is Carol frozen?
Madam
Sorry.
Chair, you're all set.
Okay, great. So where we left off on general fund cash capital is, and chime in, but we had questions on the Pollard feasibility study, the Hillside School boiler installation. What else?
I think those are the only ones involving the school.
So-
We had questions about the demolition out at,
Right, but
Yep,
for
but that didn't involve the
for
school.
Dan and Ann. Dave?
Never mind, Madam Chair.
Okay. So can we just, let's just take the Pollard feasibility study first.
All right, I can address that. So this is an additional, it's a small additional study for approximately $280,000. And the purpose of that is to continue in a small way the design effort related to the master plan for the Pollard School insofar as it addresses systems. So there is going to be very likely a need to perform maintenance and upgrade to some of the systems as we, over time, prior to any kind of master plan or construction project happening at that school. And there is a desire to make sure that whatever happens from that perspective happens potentially in harmony with some of the design concepts that are in terms of systems. So these are the major mechanical ventilation systems. We would not want to do any maintenance in the course of the next 10 years that would be ripped out because it would be incompatible with any future designs. So the idea here is to do some additional design work with regard to some of the systems so that any maintenance and repair or upgrade that happens between now and the start of construction can happen in harmony with some of the larger objectives of that project.
John?
So my question is, who's going to be performing this work? Is it an engineering firm that's going to be looking at the systems of the building, that being HVAC, electrical, and any structural matters? Or is it an architect? And if so, if it's an architect, there's sort of no design to begin with. So what more work, what is the design aspect of this? It's lost on me. I understand the mechanical, structural, engineering aspects of it. I don't understand the design, as that term's used, how that plays into this.
So as conceived, it would be done through Doran Whittier, but by the subcontractor, the mechanical electrical design subcontractor that was hired to work with the architects on the master plan.
So it's basically not something, we're not going out to an RFQ to engineering firms. We're basically adding on to the Doran Whittier contract or the hiring that was done of them to do the feasibilities, the overall master plan?
That is the conception here. That is the idea behind this particular article.
How much did we spend on Doran Whittier already?
That I would have to defer to the PPBC for. I can come back to you with that answer though.
And I guess the question is, why can't this work be, sort of the engineering aspect of it be done through our facilities department?
So the facilities department was actually working hand in hand with the school department to actually develop this idea. And it was generated by the PPBC staff who felt that the architect and the MEP sort of engineering firm that was working with that architect, it's really an extension of the master plan, so it would best be done by that firm.
And is there a scope of work, either from the engineering firm or Doran Whittier, that's been done to support the 280, what we're going to be getting for it? And if so, can that be forwarded to us, please?
Absolutely.
Is there any further discussion or questions for Ann on the Pollard feasibility?
I don't like I think the title is misleading of it. And I think, I understand looking at the mechanical engineering and any structural roof issues and looking to see if something, if they can last for 5 years or 10 years, but I don't, that's not what this title is, but yet that's the work that's being done here. So I just, not that anything needs to be done of it, I just think it's a misleading title.
Sure. I do have that alternate, I do have the budget, the scope budget for that study, and I can both send it to you and give you a quick description orally now if you prefer.
Sure.
Sure. The bulk of the expense, about 180,000, is for systems development, and that's titled as follows: Development of infrastructure solutions through options analysis, needs prioritization, and phased construction implementation. This work would occur prior to a major Pollard redevelopment project. The holistic approach includes mechanical, electrical, plumbing, /FP, building envelope, accessibility, etc. Detailed to develop scope estimates similar to MSBA PSR level.
Okay, if there's no more questions on this, let's just turn to the hillside boiler installation design.
Sure. I did believe Dan there was a desire on his part to speak to this article. I assume he's still here. I don't see him. There he is.
Hi, Dan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just, I'll just very quickly offer that it seems to me that given the realities that we are going to have to look broadly at financing capital projects, particularly building projects, and given the uncertainty of how long we can remain in the Emery Grover building, it would be wise to invest targeted and specific sums to resuscitate Hillside so that some of its key systems will continue to operate. And there are some dollars in here for the boiler. Like it has at Emery Grover, it's failed. And I know at least for next year, it's going to need at least one more heating season. And it seems to me it is wise to invest money because one thing that could be a possibility is that Hillside could become swing space for any number of projects, school administration. We don't know the disposition of Mitchell yet, but certainly school administration. So if it is possible, it seems wise to allocate the resources necessary to keep key infrastructures operating at Hillside. So I'm hoping you will be able to support this article.
Any other questions for Dan on this particular part of cash capital? So if not, I'd like to move to, while Dan and Ann are still here, Article 45 and Article 46, and then we can return to any further discussion that we have on Article 35. So Article 45 is foster care transportation reimbursement.
Thank you. I don't know if you have the description of the warrant article in front of you, but it's a fairly long-winded description for a fairly simple request, which is simply seeking approval for the school department. It's seeking town meeting approval to authorize the school department to seek reimbursement, federal reimbursement for foster care transportation. This is the transportation that we provide for foster care students. The Executive Office of Health and Human Services, in partnership with DCF and DESE, have come up with a program that would enable districts to seek reimbursement of up to 20% for the cost of that foster care transportation. And it's reimbursement through Title 4E. It does require town meeting approval, as well as authorization by the select board or town manager. And it would involve the school department entering into a contract with those three agencies, to allow us to seek this reimbursement. We don't have many students from year to year who are foster care, who receive foster care transportation, but the cost does vary. Last year, for instance, or in FY20, for instance, we had expenditures totaling approximately $15,000. We could recover potentially 20% of those costs. These receipts would go directly to the general fund.
Okay. Any further questions on Article 45? John?
And are these students who are, the transportation is being paid for them to leave Needham and go to other places? Or is it for them to come from other places to go to school in Needham? Or is it both?
Well, it depends on who which district has programmatic responsibility. Typically, students are required to remain in their school of origin. So if they were a Needham resident at one point or had a family connection here, they would be required to remain or were outside the district and had a family connection in Needham, they would come to Needham and we would be required to transport them. So this would be only for those cases where we would be programmatically responsible.
Josh?
So I had a question about the last sentence of the description. It says at present, the payments received under this program would be received by the general fund. Does that mean that currently the funds are eligible for reimbursement? And then secondly, go ahead.
No, please. I'm sorry.
Oh, I guess the second part was you said that they would be received by the general fund, but then in the text it says that funds received would be used for payment of services.
There was some confusion there, and we did receive so the text, the text of the program indicated that the school department potentially could access those funds and apply the costs to those revenues and offset the school budget. But it appears that DESI's interpretation is a more global one, that the town would be reimbursed for expenses that the school department incurred, not that the school department would essentially be able to apply its expenses. So this is really reimbursing the town. And so the funds would go directly, according to DESI, to the general fund.
And so currently the town, or either the schools or the town, is not eligible for reimbursement?
Correct.
Okay. And then, so one last thing. So does the text need to be amended when it says, so the motion says provides that the payment for services under such contracts be made from the reimbursements or the revenues? It sounds like that's not the case anymore, right?
Well, what I understand it to be is that it is reimbursing the town in sort of a global sense, that the town as an entity is being reimbursed for expenses that the town is incurring, not necessarily that the school department will be able to reimburse those, receive the reimbursement directly.
But those reimbursements aren't earmarked towards anything.
Correct. If they're received by the general fund, they would remain a general fund receipt.
But I think what Josh is saying is that second part of the article needs to come out because it is not correct. And that's probably a question for Dave Davison, is we need to probably amend that.
This is the text directly from the program, but we have been assured by DESI that this is, that a general fund receipt is the proper treatment for those funds. Very similar to the way Medicaid receipts reimbursement is received.
Dave?
We'll confer with town council to see if the article needs to be amended or if it's appropriately written, and let the finance committee know.
Great. Yep.
Yeah, just in that context, what does the phrase "without appropriation of such revenues" mean in the text of the motion?
Typically, it means that it doesn't need to be appropriated by town meeting in order for the school department to apply expense to that. It's similar to expenses that are incurred in a revolving fund. Do not necessarily, the revolving fund receipts don't necessarily need to be appropriated by town meeting based on the underlying statutory authorization.
Okay, thank you.
So is there any further discussion? Louise?
I just would like to make a motion, if I may.
Yes,
I
you
move
may.
that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of Article 45, foster care transportation reimbursement.
Second motion.
Great.
Did we want to wait to hear back if the language needed to be amended before taking a position?
My position won't change based on the language.
Yeah,
I know.
I think we can move forward with the motion. Let's take a vote on it. Tom?
Yes.
Barry Kaufman?
Yes.
Rick Lunetta,
Yes.
Dick Riley,
Yes.
John Conley,
Yes.
Josh Levy,
Yes.
Louise Miller,
Yes.
Jim Healy,
Yes.
and myself, yes. So Article 46, Special Education Stabilization Fund.
Thank you. This is a request to create what many districts have already created, which is something of an extraordinary relief fund for extraordinary special education costs. In 2016, the legislature authorized an amendment to Chapter 70, Section 13E, which would allow school departments to create a special education specific stabilization fund. And the purpose of the stabilization fund is to offset extraordinary increases in any year that are incurred because of special education tuition, or special education transportation. Under the law, a school district, by majority vote of both the school committee and town meeting, may establish this kind of fund. It's a majority vote and not a 2/3 vote, somewhat dissimilar to other stabilization funds. But they may create and appropriate funding to such a stabilization fund, and it would be used to pay, without further appropriation, those specific types of expenses. In the years where the funds would be needed, in the event of some kind of extraordinary increase that couldn't otherwise be handled directly by the school operating budget, then the school department would be able to access those funds by majority vote of both the school committee and the board and the select board. However, appropriating additional funds to that reserve fund would require the majority vote of town meeting and the school committee again.
Mhm. Tom?
Well, how have these extraordinary expenses been handled in the past?
So they have been handled in the past with some deal of anxiety, because we don't have within the school operating budget a pure contingency to account for unanticipated move-ins and other things. What we try to do is use our resources through, savings in one line item of the budget to offset those increases that we experience. We do have some ability to deal with increases from year to year. The idea with this fund is that this is the extraordinary type of expense that we would not otherwise be able to deal with. So our expectation would not be that we would access these monies on any kind of a regular basis. It would really be for those years where we had no other resource or recourse.
To follow up, so is there some reason the standard reserve fund wouldn't work for you?
Well, two reasons, I suppose. This fund is specific to special education costs, and it has a very specific purpose. It would be, there's a great deal of transparency in how we would use these funds. They would have to be voted and authorized by different boards. I think also, with the reserve fund, the school department might be one of many requesters to the reserve fund. So this is really a dedicated, specialized funding source that would be used infrequently for those extraordinary costs that would not compete with any other potential use of your reserve fund.
So just my final comment is that's actually, that's part of the issue I think I have with this, is that it becomes dedicated and therefore it doesn't allow us to use it for other issues in town. The more reserve, we have several reserve funds, and there's some reluctance, I think, at least by myself and maybe others on the finance committee, to create another one, which carves out a section of a bit of money that makes it unusable elsewhere when there might be extraordinary needs in other departments or other areas of town. So that's just my final comment. I'll let other speakers ask questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Dick?
Yeah, I have a few mechanical questions. As I read it, this fund is limited, is capped at 2% of the operating budget, so that's roughly what, $1.4 million?
It's 2% of net school spending, which is something different than the operating budget.
Okay.
But what that essentially is the equivalent to is a little under $1.3 million.
Okay, then just as a follow-up, it apparently could be funded by including an element of this in your school budget, am I correct?
Correct. Once it's established, that's a mechanism that
Yep.
can fund it because it would be approved both by the school committee and town meeting in that manner as well.
So as a sort of a follow-up to Tom's concerns, my concern is that the school budget will be increased by this amount in order to fund it in the first place. So there would be, if you will, I'll try to pick an unloaded word, utilization of funds that otherwise could flow out to, other than the school department, will be used to fund this account. And it gives me concern.
Sure. Understood. Although it's not necessarily the only way that it could be funded. It could be funded through some type of allocation of free cash or fund balance or one-time use, because it is essentially a one-time use of funds and does not necessarily have to compete with recurring uses.
True.
Other recurring sources.
True.
Rick?
I can see where you're going, but I'm just a little uncomfortable because I think you do your job too well. For years and years and years, we hear about prepaying tuition for the next year. And so you've been able to do that quite successfully. So when these larger unexpected things have come up, you've still chosen to prepay tuition. And so obviously there was money there. I'm inclined to request that you continue to do as you do because you do it well. And when those really extraordinary issues arise that for which your planning and your ability to move things around doesn't work, you come to use the reserve fund. I would agree that all this will do is lock up funds for which we couldn't use for anything else but this, and you seem to be doing it well now, and just jump on the reserve fund when that time comes. So I'm really not in favor of segregating funds for this purpose when the reserve fund is there, and you seem to be doing it incredibly well now.
John?
I had a question about the transfer out, that the school committee and the select board are a party to that or involved in that, but the finance committee is not. Is that what the statute reads? And that's why, and so we have to go along, would have to comply with that because that's what the statute says?
Dan?
That's what the statute says, but we have local control, so you certainly could create a mechanism in Needham where you have the authority of the three boards.
Well,
That's
John?
not in the article.
I'm not sure that it needs to be in the article.
Well, it would be, at least for me to support, it would have to be in there.
Okay.
And
So-
yeah.
Oh, no, a similar concern as John is that town meeting also wouldn't have any say in the expenditure of the funds. I'm curious if, so instead of establishing a stabilization fund under this chapter 40, section 13E, I'm curious if you'd considered establishing one under the traditional, chapter 40, section 5B, or other stabilization funds that require a town meeting vote, both to put money in and to take money out.
I do believe that one of the considerations here that has affected how the legislature has, created and authorized this kind of stabilization fund is that there is some aspect of confidentiality and sensitivity to the expenses. We simply aren't able to talk in public session about specific kids. And, a lot of, we can't really convey a lot of specific information about, who and how we got here. All we can really say is that, this is this is the expense. Here's some general information, but that's all we have. So I do think that was part of the reasoning here.
Jim.
I think town meeting would understand that you couldn't discuss that, but I think they might still appreciate having a say in the expenditure of the funds.
Jim.
I think these funds are essential, but I don't believe in the mechanism. So my own view would be to put them in the reserve fund. I don't agree to create another stabilization fund, even under the original paradigm. I think those stabilization funds, as I've mentioned before, I'd love to know when the last time we actually took money out of a stabilization fund. So I don't think that's the way to go. I think we should, if there's additional monies that need to be set aside into the reserve fund, that's where they should be. I think the school committee should then have an opportunity to come and explain without getting into any confidentiality or HIPAA-related information. But that's what I would like to see done.
Oh, Louise, sorry.
So I think everyone, Jim is new on the committee, but everyone knows I do not favor stabilization funds. We have to have a really good reason for them. And here, I don't think the school have had a single instance that I can recall where they were unable to meet their budget because of actually period. Unable to meet their budget. And so I don't see the need for a stabilization fund. And we do have a very rich reserve fund. And we meet very often. So it wouldn't be difficult to access those funds from the reserve fund. That's it.
Anyone else? Can we, Josh?
No, I would make a motion that the Finance Committee recommend against adoption of Article, what are we? 46.
Second.
All right, let's take a voice vote. Tom, Jacob?
Yes to the,
Motion.
and make sure I'm voting properly. The motion was to not approve, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Barry?
So actually, can I just, when this appears on our green sheet, how are we going to make sure that everyone understands that it's a motion to not adopt? You write that in, Louise?
I put the result of the vote, so it'll say not adopt.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
It's okay. Barry Kaufman?
Yes to the motion.
Rick Lunetta?
Yes.
Dick Riley?
Yes.
John Conley?
Yes.
Josh Levy?
Yes.
Louise Miller?
Yes.
Jim Healy?
Yes to the no.
And the chair votes yes to the no as well. So Article 46 was not adopted by the Finance Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dan, thank you, Dan.
And Dan, I'll move you back to the attendees.
Thank you.
Ann, are you really on vacation?
No.
Extra.
I was going to say, I'm really jealous because the waves are coming in. They keep on coming in.
I'm on vacation in my mind.
All right.
Even better.
Was it the sunlight that maybe gave it away, Jim?
I don't know. The
But she
wave
wasn't
just
in the
never
Bahamas?
stopped. It was the wave that just kept on coming at the same thing.
She said she was in the Bahamas. It would be dark there too.
Ah.
Okay. So going back to general fund cash capital, the thing we have less to really discuss is Ridge Hill,
Yes.
Dave.
Madam Chair, we will have additional information relative to the cost and the purposes of taking down the building um, for you for your next meeting next week on
Okay.
Ridge Hill.
So then we should include this in next week's agenda. Louise?
Dave, could I have a clarification? Did Kate say that she would like to discuss the union articles not next week, another time?
I think she said something about they're going to be dual meetings. I think the Board of Selectmen are
Right.
meeting the same time we are.
Yeah,
They're
because
meeting- yeah, they're
following
meeting
the
6
election.
o'clock. I'm just, it may be that we need to have a meeting on the 21st. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Louise, I'll get back to you once I get clarification.
Okay, thank you.
And Dave, John, sorry.
Could I just ask just a question, this is a mechanical question on the general fund cash capital. If there are like 1 or 2 or 3 specific ones that we don't support, that someone doesn't support, how do we, do we make a motion within our group, or does someone make a motion within our group to, adopt the article except for 1, 2, or 3 things? I just wanted to get some clarification on mechanically how that would work.
Dave?
Yes, the committee could do that with any of its recommendations, for instance, not adopt, or you could recommend adoption with the following changes. That would be a motion to amend. So the article as stated would be the main motion, but the Finance Committee could, if it wasn't already supported by the Select Board, could make a motion to amend for town meeting.
Or between now and town meeting, the moving party can amend the motion based on our reaction.
Correct. Well, what I was trying to convey is make sure that there are many ways to get there.
Okay.
I think this might be a chair, vice chair type of conversation, Madam Chair.
Yeah. So, but we will have additional information next week. Is that right, Dave?
That's correct.
Okay. And then my last question to you, Dave, is on the financial analysis with respect to the school master plan. Will that be concluded before the 21st, or what's your estimation there?
I would like to commit to you tonight.
I'm not pushing you. I'm just wondering.
Yes. But I would like to commit to you, but I can't guarantee that yet. But my labors are there on that plan, and because the Select Board need it as well, and there are other boards in town whose decisions I anticipate will be impacted by that.
Yeah, it will be difficult to keep moving forward with respect to Emery Grover if we have to push that off till having a conversation on the 28th.
Well, it's the elephant in the room, and in my view, whether it came out today or whether it comes out the 14th, the 21st, or the 28th, there's not sufficient time to have the robust and requisite discussions that that plan would have and how it implicates not only Emery Grover, but also other projects. So I don't know why we're just not coming out right now and saying that, with that not, and it's not that anyone's at fault for not being there, but because it hasn't happened, I don't know why we just come out and say that we wouldn't be able to support the Emery Grover one as it currently stands.
And others as well.
And
There
others.
are others. Yeah.
I just don't keep giving this false hope. To me, doesn't benefit anybody.
Mhm. So I think Jim had suggested the chairs and vice chairs.
Mm-hmm.
communication.
Yeah. So Louise, can we schedule that?
Yes, I'll talk to Kate
Okay,
or Dave.
thank you. Any other issues? Comments, questions?
I bring a motion to adjourn.
Second, and do I have a second?
Second.
Great. Let's take a vote. Tom,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes, and I will not be here next week.
okay. Rick,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Good night.
Good night.